Cold water touched her face, sharp, sobering. The girl scooped it from the terracotta basin and drew her wet palms along her neck, behind her ears, across her collarbones. Droplets trickled beneath the thin tunic, leaving cold trails upon her skin. She dried herself with a piece of rough cloth, then reached for the clay amphora of myrtle oil. A few drops in her palm. The oil was warm, thick, with a tart, sweetish scent. She rubbed it between her fingers and slowly traced it along her arms, shoulders, chest. Her skin became slippery, gleaming in the light of the oil lamp. From outside came the rumble of Pompeii, voices of merchants, barking dogs, the clatter of hooves on basalt paving stones. But here, in the tiny cell of the Lupanar on Vicolo del Balcone Pensil, silence reigned, heavy, saturated with anticipation and lamp smoke. She looked at her reflection in a shard of polished bronze. A face whitened with lead powder to unnatural pallor. Eyes lined with antimony so thickly they appeared as black hollows. Lips and cheeks painted with cinnabar. Poison red, like a theatrical mask. This was a ritual repeated every evening. Transformation from person into commodity, from woman into fantasy. The fresco above the doorway depicted an explicit scene of intimacy. Man and woman merged in embrace, rendered with that directness found everywhere in this city. On the corridor wall, drawings scratched in charcoal, names, prices, obscene commentary. The walls remembered everything. Footsteps on the stone staircase. A man's voice, drunk, demanding, the clink of coins. She exhaled, straightened her shoulders, and smiled into the darkness of the corridor with that smile they had taught her on the first day. Submissive, promising, empty. This was an ordinary evening in the Lupanars of Pompeii. The 8th hour of night, around the 2nd hour by modern reckoning. 24 days before Vesuvius would awaken and erase this city in 17 hours. But for now, the volcano slept, and in the narrow stone rooms, women prepared for the night, as they did every evening, as they had done for centuries. Oil lamps cast trembling light upon the painted walls. The smell of unwashed bodies mingled with myrtle oil and smoke. Stone couches waited, cold, narrow, covered with thin straw mattresses. Somewhere in the neighboring cell it had begun. Rhythmic sounds, feigned moans, the creak of straw. But for now the city was alive, noisy, carefree, and at its heart flourished an industry that Roman society preferred not to speak of aloud, yet actively patronized every day. When excavations of Pompeii began in 1748, researchers encountered findings that shook them. Frescoes of unprecedented explicitness, drawings untranslatable in polite society, and buildings whose purpose was impossible to conceal. Lupanaria. From the Latin word lupa, she-wolf. This is what Romans called women of loose morals, because they attracted clients with a characteristic sound resembling a howl. In Pompeii, a city with a population of approximately 20,000, archaeologists discovered traces of at least 35 such establishments. From tiny single-room alcoves to the 2-story building on Vicolo del Balcone Pensile, preserved almost completely. A 2-story structure covering roughly 100 square meters. 5 rooms on the ground floor, 5 on the second. A narrow corridor, a steep staircase. Everything subordinated to a single purpose. Each cell represented a tiny space, measuring 2 meters by 3. The stone couch occupied nearly the entire area, 1.5 meters in length, just over a meter in width. Height from the floor, 40 centimeters. No mattresses, only traces of straw bedding that had decomposed over the centuries. Archaeologists found depressions in the stone where fluids would collect. Hygiene was minimal. Above each doorway, a fresco. Not decorative, but functional. A kind of menu for visitors, many of whom were illiterate. Preserved images show various positions and scenes of explicit content. Everything rendered with directness, without halftones. Red ochre, yellow, black, simple pigments, clear lines, instructions for use. The walls are covered with drawings, more than 120 inscriptions in Latin and Greek, voices of people who were here 2,000 years ago. Felix kiss as well, a laconic recommendation. Here, Florus was with Pasiphae, Graffito with date. Attica for 2 asses, for 8 asses, full evening, a price list. Vibia from Rome, I miss you. A rare personal note. I want to go home, scratched an uncertain hand in the corner of a cell. Names repeat: Trauca, Lorei, Maritima, Murta, Eutychia, Attica, Felicula. Greek names dominate, indicating origins. Most were enslaved women from the eastern provinces. Clients also left records, assessments, complaints, praise, jokes. The prices are surprisingly low. 2 asses, the minimum cost. This is the price of a loaf of bread. 8 asses for an experienced woman or additional services. 16 asses for the entire night. For comparison, entry to the baths cost 2 asses, dinner at a thermopolium, 4 to 8 asses. The women of the Lupanars occupied the very bottom of the social ladder. These were enslaved women, sold here by their owners, the Lenones. The purchase price for a girl ranged from 600 to 2,000 sesterces. The Leno purchased living merchandise that was expected to pay for itself within a year or 2. Roman legislation approached the oldest profession pragmatically. It was a legal occupation subject to taxation. Emperor Caligula introduced a special levy, vectigal ex capturis, equal to the price of 1 visit. Women were obliged to register with the aediles, wear distinctive clothing, a toga instead of a stola, and dye their hair in bright colors. But legality did not mean respect. They were infames, disgraced by law. They could not inherit, could not testify in court. They existed in a legal gray zone, visible yet rightless. Analysis of skeletal remains revealed most were between 15 and 25 years of age. Many began as children, at 12 or 13 years old. By 30, they were either sold to cheaper establishments, or they departed this life from disease, exhaustion. Archaeologists found tiny bone figurines, children's amulets, toys. Evidence that girls barely past childhood lived here. Beside the stone couches, remnants of wooden trunks, mirror shards, cheap bracelets, combs, small vials of oil. At the building's entrance, an image of a phallus carved in stone. Not obscenity, but a symbol of good fortune. But here it also served as a marker. A series of such images on the pavements led from the city center straight to the doors. The layer of ash preserved everything. The frescoes remained vivid, the drawings legible. When archaeologists entered here in the 19th century, they witnessed a moment frozen in time. The final working day of the oldest profession. They awakened late. The Lupanars operated from evening until dawn, sleep falling during daylight hours. Light broke through narrow slits. The ground floor cells had no windows. Upstairs there were tiny openings. The stuffiness was suffocating. The smell of sweat, oil, smoke embedded itself in stone, clothing, skin. First order, ablution. Water was brought in amphorae from the nearest fountain, poured into terracotta basins in the common area. The women took turns washing, rinsing away cosmetics, traces of the night. The water quickly clouded, but there was no hurry to change it until evening. Hygiene was primitive. They used pieces of sponge instead of soap. Real soap was expensive. Sometimes they scrubbed themselves with sand and olive oil. After difficult nights, everything burned, skin chafed to bleeding. Then they applied a mixture of oil and ash. It stung, but aided healing. Contraception existed, but was unreliable. They used pessaries of oiled wool soaked in vinegar. They drank infusions of rue, wormwood, wild carrot seeds. But pregnancies occurred. Then the Leno sent them to a midwife. Many departed this life from hemorrhaging after procedures. Breakfast was meager. Brought from the thermopolium were leftovers. Stale bread, a few olives, a piece of salted fish. They ate in silence, quickly. Conversation was not encouraged. The Leno feared the women would conspire to flee. After the meal began preparation for the evening, a ritual stretched over hours, the only time when they controlled anything at all. First, oil. Myrtle, the cheapest in Campania. Rubbed into the skin slowly, methodically. Oil-masked odor made skin smooth. Wealthy courtesans used rose oil, iris, nard, but in the Lupanars, there were no means for such things. Then hair. Washed rarely, once every 5 to 7 days. They used a mixture of ash and fat, combed out lice with wooden combs. Parasites were a universal problem. Dyed hair in bright colors, as the law required, with henna to auburn, with chamomile decoction to yellow. Cosmetics were simultaneously adornment and mask. Faces were whitened with lead powder, a poisonous mixture causing rashes, poisoning. Eyes were lined with antimony, thickly, dramatically. Lips were painted with cinnabar, a mercury compound. Women who had worked 5 to 7 years began losing teeth. Skin became covered with sores. Poisoning was an occupational affliction. Clothing, a thin tunic of cheap linen, often semi-transparent. Cheap jewelry, bronze bracelets, glass beads. Anything valuable had to be hidden in wall crevices, beneath stones. Each maintained a secret cache. A few coins concealed from the Leno, a stolen hairpin, a gift from a generous client. Hierarchy existed even here. Young and beautiful women worked on the second floor, where prices were higher. The older descended below, where they served drunkards for 2 asses. There was an unofficial elder who trained newcomers, smoothed over conflicts. Training was brutal. A newcomer was told once how to use oil, how to pretend to receive pleasure. Moans must sound convincing. How to make him finish quickly, to accept the next one. How to recognize a violent drunk, how to scream if help was needed. Each visit was recorded. The Leno accepted payment, issued a token, tessera. At night's end, the tokens were counted. The woman received no money. Everything went to the Leno. But the number of tokens affected conditions. Those who brought more income were fed slightly better. Some tried to conceal money. If a client was drunk, one could take coins directly. This was dangerous. If the Leno discovered it, a beating followed. But each hidden coin was a step toward the dream, to purchase one's own freedom. The price of freedom was astronomical, with earnings of 2 to 8 asses per visit, receiving 10 to 15 clients per night. Buying oneself out was nearly impossible. But there was another possibility: to attract a steady patron who would purchase her freedom and make her a concubine. This happened rarely, but it happened. The drawings preserved, Vibia was purchased by the merchant Lucius. Follicula became the concubine of a knight. For most, there was one path: work while the body allows. Until 25 or 30. Then, sail to a cheaper establishment, or work on the street, or departure from this life through illness, beatings, poisoning from cosmetics. The sun set behind Vesuvius, staining the sky blood red. This was the 24th day of August in the 79th year, one day before the eruption. But the city did not know. It lived its ordinary life. In the Lupanar lamps were being lit. Cheap oil burned with a sooty flame, casting shadows on the frescoes. The smell of smoke mingled with myrrh, sweat, fried fish from the thermopolium. 10 women prepared for their shift. The eldest was 29, had worked here 11 years, her face corroded by lead powder, her teeth rotting. They stood along the corridor at the cell doors, waiting. Thin tunics clung to oiled bodies. Faces, identical masks, hair bright, smiles empty. 10 living frescoes, complementing those painted on walls. The door opened. The first visitors, laughter, voices in Latin and Greek, the smell of wine. The Leno sat at the entrance, accepting coins, issuing tokens. Beside him, a slave guard, a former gladiator with a disfigured face. The first to ascend was a young patrician. He came with friends, laughing loudly. Young men of 18 to 20 years, for whom this was an initiation. They were shy, but hid embarrassment behind coarseness. This one, the patrician pointed. The girl smiled submissively, turned away, entered the cell. Behind her back fell a woolen curtain, an illusion of privacy in a building where walls admitted every sound. Thus began the night, a standard night in the Lupanar of Pompeii. On the ground floor, work proceeded like an assembly line. Sailors, soldiers, slaves. They came, paid 2 asses, went up, 5 minutes, 10 at most. Left the token, departed. Next, the women worked mechanically, lie down, moan convincingly, take the token, tidy oneself, wait for the next. Between clients, 30 seconds, time to splash water. On the second floor, the pace was slower, demands higher. Merchants, freedmen, paid 8 to 16 asses and expected the illusion of intimacy. They wanted her to pretend she enjoyed it, to embrace, kiss, whisper pleasant things. One of the women upstairs, Trauka, was a master of pretense. She greeted with a smile that seemed genuine, helped undress, massaged shoulders, asked about the day, listened, nodded. Men left satisfied, left gratuities and extras that could be hidden. But even this was exhausting. By midnight, Trauka had served 7. Her face ached from smiling. Her jaw throbbed, her body burned. She sat on the edge of the couch, staring at the lamp. The flame trembled, casting shadows. In her cache, in a crevice behind stone, lay 17 denarii. She had saved for 3 years. The price of freedom, 150 denarii. 133 remained. At the current pace, another 20 years. But by that time, she would be 49. No one lived that long. Footsteps. A new client. She opened her eyes, straightened her shoulders, smiled. Around the third hour, troubles began. A drunken sailor struck a girl. She screamed. The guard came running, threw out the sailor. The girl sat in the corner, holding her split lip. "You'll rest 10 minutes. Get back to work." By the fourth hour, the flow thinned. The most intoxicated had left. Night workers remained, bakers, watchmen. They came quickly, silently, departed. At dawn, the Lupanar emptied. The Leno locked the door, counted the tokens. 132 acts for the night. A good day. The women descended to the basin of water. Silently, they tidied themselves with cold water. The water turned pink. No one changed it. Then upstairs, to the couches, beneath thin blankets, to fall into heavy sleep. In a few hours to awaken, begin anew. But the next day would not come. In 24 hours, Vesuvius would awaken. The sky would darken with ash. The city would suffocate under a rain of stone. People would flee toward the gates, toward the sea. Most would not make it in time. In the Lupanar, one of the women would try to hide in a corner. She would press herself against the wall, cover her head with her arms, pray to gods she had ceased believing in. Ash would block the doorway. Gases would fill the room. She would depart within minutes from lack of air. Beside her would lie 2 coins, 2 asses, hidden from the Leno. Her final wealth, her final hope. Ash would blanket everything. And in 2,000 years, archaeologists would open this building. Would see the couches, frescoes, drawings, would read the names, Trauca, Lore, Maritima, Follicula. Would try to imagine what these women were like, what they dreamed of. But stone does not preserve answers, only the question written on the wall. I want to go home. When in 1863, the archaeologist Giuseppe Fiorelli excavated the building on Vicolo del Balcone Pensile, he faced a dilemma. The frescoes were explicit to the point of indecency, the drawings untranslatable. The building's purpose raised no doubts, and this embarrassed Victorian audiences. Fiorelli adopted a compromise. The building was preserved, access restricted. Frescoes partially covered. Explicit artifacts were sent to the secret cabinet of the Naples Museum, a collection shown only to men with permission, but voices broke through the censorship. The drawings were too numerous. Researchers began cataloging, and from brief scratches on walls, a picture of life took shape. Names repeated. Follicula, 7 times, clients praised her. Trauca, 5 times one wrote, Trauca, you made me forget about my wife. Each left a trace. Not by choice, they were illiterate. Their names were written by men who used them. But among the obscene inscriptions, others appeared. Strange ones. Bibia, I wish you were free. In Greek, in neat letters. Maritima, forgive me. Without explanation, simply an apology. Here slept the beautiful Sabina, but not with me. Melancholy. Want to go home? In trembling hand, barely able to write. 2 words in Latin, domus dulcis, longing for home, which perhaps never existed. For a life that ended on the day of sale. Modern research added details. Bone analysis revealed malnutrition, disease, injuries. Average lifespan, 25 years, 15 years, less than average Roman women. Isotopic analysis of teeth revealed origins. Most were born outside Italy, in Greece, Asia Minor, Syria, Egypt, Africa. They were brought by sea, sold in markets, distributed throughout the empire. Finds in the cells revealed attempts to preserve humanity. tiny amulets, mirror shards, toys. In one cell, archaeologists found a cache. 19 asses, a silver coin, a bone hairpin, a bracelet fragment. Someone's attempt to accumulate money for freedom. Someone had hidden these for months, risking beatings, and departed this life with wealth beneath the ash. The history of the Lupanars is not a history of seduction. It is a history of exploitation, survival, systems that transformed people into commodities. The Roman Empire rested on enslaved labor. This was merely one facet. The women of the Lupanars were not courtesans who chose this path. They were enslaved women without names, without rights, without choice. Their beauty became a curse, their only weapon, the ability to endure another day. Some were fortunate. The drawings preserved rare stories. Follicula was purchased by a merchant. Eutychia received her freedom. Vibia became the concubine of a knight. But these are exceptions. For most, the path ended in the same cell or in a common grave. The eruption of Vesuvius took the lives of 10 to 16,000 people. Among them, women of the Lupanars. Their skeletons were found in poses of desperation, pressed against walls, covering their faces. Ash made no distinction between patrician and slave, between matron and woman of loose morals. It covered all equally. And in this, there was justice. Tragic departure equalized those whom life had divided. Today, tourists come here, photograph the frescoes, laugh at the drawings, marvel at the size of the couches, spend 5 to 10 minutes, move on to the next attraction. But sometimes, someone lingers, stands in the cramped cell, gazing at the inscription, "I want to go home," and for a second time, collapses. 2,000 years vanish. And we hear the voice of a woman whose name is lost, whose life was reduced to a function, whose departure passed unnoticed. She wanted to go home. She never made it. But her voice reached us, scratched into stone, preserved by ash, breaking through across the centuries. This is the only monument she has. 2 words on the wall of a house of pleasures in a lifeless city. Beauty did not save them. Bodies did not purchase freedom. Hope did not materialize. Only this remained: stone, ash, and inscriptions. And the question they left: how can a society considering itself civilized transform people into commodities? A question Rome did not answer. A question that resonates today. Pompeii froze in the final instant before catastrophe. The Lupanar on Vicolo del Balcone Pensile, a time capsule that sealed the truth about lives that history prefers not to notice. The women in the shadow of Vesuvius did not change the world. They simply tried to survive in a system that saw in them only a function. Their story did not end with the eruption. It continues each time we read their names on the walls. Each time we try to imagine their faces beneath masks of lead powder and carmine. Each time we hear across the centuries, "I want to go home." Vesuvius granted them immortality in the cruelest way, by transforming the final day into eternity. But it also gave them a voice, and we are obliged to hear it. Because these women were not an exception, but the rule. In every Roman city, such establishments existed. In each worked girls, sold by parents, abducted by pirates, born into slavery. Pompeii is unique only in that ash preserved their traces. But their sisters lived and departed this life throughout the empire. In Rome, Alexandria, Antioch, Londinium, their names were not recorded, their voices were not heard, except for those scratched on the walls of Pompeii. Archaeology has given us a rare opportunity to hear the voices of those who never had the right to a voice, to see the lives of those who were invisible in life, to understand the price of the civilization we admire. The Roman Empire left us roads, aqueducts, law, philosophy, literature, but it also left these stone couches, these explicit frescoes, these desperate inscriptions. And if we wish to understand Rome truly, we must see both sides: marble forums and filthy lupanars, magnificent baths and squalid cells. The freedom of citizens and the enslavement of those who were not citizens. History loves heroes, generals, emperors, philosophers. But history consists not only of them. It consists also of the nameless, the rightless, the forgotten, of those who lived and departed this life in shadow, leaving behind nothing except scratches on a wall. I want to go home. 3 words that outweigh thousands of solemn inscriptions on triumphal arches. Because in them, the entire truth about what it means to be a person deprived of freedom, a commodity that dreams of becoming human again. Vesuvius buried Pompeii, but it also preserved it for us. And now, after 2,000 years, we can enter these cramped cells, see these stone couches, read these inscriptions, and hear voices that Roman society preferred not to hear. This is not merely archaeology. This is a lesson about the price of civilization, about how the brilliance of empires often rests on the suffering of those we do not see, about how beauty can be a curse, about how freedom is not a given, but a privilege of which many were deprived, and about how, even in the darkest places, even in the most hopeless circumstances, people preserve one thing: the desire to return home, to themselves, to a life that belongs to them, not to those who purchased their bodies. The women of the Pompeii Lupanars have been gone for 2,000 years, but their voice lives. It sounds in every visitor who pauses at the inscription Domus Dulcis and understands that behind these 2 words stands an entire life. Pain, hope, despair, and dream. They wanted to go home. We cannot return that home to them, but we can do something else. Not forget them, not pass by. Hear what they tried to say across the centuries, and perhaps ask ourselves the question: in what world do we wish to live? In a world that transforms people into commodities, or in a world that sees in every person a human being? Pompeii gives us the opportunity to glimpse the past, but it also compels us to look at the present, because history, unfortunately, has a tendency to repeat itself. This is the entire truth about life in the shadow of Vesuvius. This is not a story of seduction, it is a chronicle of survival, where women occupied the very bottom of society. Their beauty became not an opportunity, but a curse. Their only weapon was the ability to endure and hope for one more day. It is striking how across 2,000 years, these voices break through, scratched into stone, preserved by ash. Is it not remarkable that the story no one wished to tell was preserved forever? If this story moved you, leave a response below the video. Subscribe to learn more about those whose fates history concealed. Press the bell. Ahead lie even more gripping tales of women whose lives were a struggle for survival. Soon we shall unveil new secrets from the past. Until we meet again, friends,